Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be working on another Scratch project, and the theme of today is going to be ecosystems. So we're going to be telling stories about ecosystems, and we're going to be using some biotic, that means living, and abiotic, that means non-living, characters in order to do that. Now, the first thing I'd like you to do is go ahead and name your project. So I assume you've gotten to Scratch already, you've pressed create. Now it's time to name your project before you do anything else. That way it auto-saves. So I'm just going to type in my initials, JK, and I'm going to type in nature story. Now you can press the share button in order to make sure others can see your work, and then you can add it to a studio from there. Okay, now the first thing I'd like you to do is go to backgrounds, and we're going to choose a background that perhaps looks like someplace near our homes. So I'm going to click on outdoors. I live in the White Mountains, so I'm going to choose a forested landscape. But as long as you choose something outdoors, something that has living things and non-living things, you should be good. So I'm going to choose forest. Now I have some choices now in the characters. Now I'd like you to choose at least 2 characters. So you can click here and perhaps start with a biotic character, something that's alive. The goal of our story today is to have a living thing, a biotic organism, interacting with another biotic organism or an abiotic organism. So I'm going to click on animals. I'm going to choose my biotic organism first. Now I could choose a butterfly. I could choose a bear. I could choose a hedgehog. I have a lot of options. I'm going to choose something that I know lives in the ecosystem that I chose, that forested ecosystem. So I'm actually going to choose a hedgehog. Now I'm going to use my knowledge of hedgehogs to choose something that it might interact with, right? It might touch in some way. It might use it for food. It might use it for shelter. Some organisms help each other. And that's called a mutualistic relationship. So I might choose something that might help the hedgehog, and the hedgehog might help it back. I'm going to click on sprites again. Now, what does my character interact with? Now, it could live under a rock, so that might be an abiotic factor. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to move it over here. And then when I'm at my coding stage, I'm just going to drag over blocks that allow my hedgehog to go back to its shelter. So I'm going to choose when green flag is clicked. I'm going to grab a go-to block. This will just send my character back to its starting point every time you start your new code. And then I'm just going to drag it over to the rock. And as you can see, every time I drag it, these numbers over here on the glide blocks change to its current location. So I can actually drag my hedgehog over to the rock, grab my glide, and then when I press green flag, it's going to send it back to the beginning, and then it's going to glide over to the rock. So let's press green flag. Ooh, it moved really fast though. Here, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's have it go 3 seconds. Try again. That seems more like a hedgehog speed. Now the last thing I'm going to do is choose under looks. So I'm going to click looks. And then I'm going to send it to the back layer. That way, when it gets to the rock, it'll disappear. Great. So we've created a story now together where a hedgehog is finding shelter behind a rock. Now, if you want to take this further, you can go to sprites and you can choose a biotic factor or organism that it might interact with as well. Now, apples are considered biotic because they were once living. So I can choose an apple, might have been picked and has fallen on the ground, and I'm going to have my hedgehog actually eat it after a while. So I'm going to make it really small so that it's hedgehog sized. And now I'm going to go back to my hedgehog, and I'm going to say it's going to wait for 5 seconds at the rock, and then snag the hedgehog. Then it's going to make its way over to the apple and eat it. So once I drag my hedgehog to the apple, I can go back to motion. And remember, every time I grab a glide block, it's going to have my character's current position right here. So if I drag this glide block here, it's going to, when my hedgehog is back at the rock, it's going to tell it to glide all the way over to the apple. So I'm going to press green flag to test this out. My hedgehog is interacting with its abiotic factor, waits 5 seconds. I'm going to move my rock a little bit. And then it goes over to the apple because it's really excited. It wants to eat the apple. Now, the last thing we need to do is just make sure that the apple disappears. So we can say, we can go to the apple's code and we can say, when green flag is pressed, we can use that same block. We can go to looks and we can go to the back layer. That way, when the hedgehog goes over the apple, it will disappear. So we can test our story one more time. Goes behind the rock, it's sheltering, and then it moves out. And oh, that didn't work. Maybe we need to say, because we're telling both of them to go to the back layer, maybe we need to say once it gets there, it's going to go to the front layer again. Once the hedgehog gets there, it's going to go to the front layer again. So I'm going to grab a go to front layer. We'll test this one more time. Success. All right. Once you finish your code, of course, if you haven't saved it yet, save it, share it. Other things you can do with this code, you can add more complicated things. Imagine what happens if you could code it to rain, and then your hedgehog would have to find shelter once it starts to rain. That would be an abiotic factor, right? Rain coming down. Or imagine if a predator came out. What would the hedgehog do then? So you can start to create a story that really says what's going on in your ecosystem. And you can base your story around books that you read, stories that you hear, and other ways of finding out the science of your backyard.